Okay, so this is from a Patreon, or from Patreon, and if you'd like to be a patron or on Patreon, whatever, link is below. We do our 4th mini-sode a month on there, and then we have what we have created as the after show. It's the Community Gardens podcast, so check that out. It's exclusive to all patrons. So let's get into this. This is from Natalie.
Hey, Natalie.
She's so sweet. Hey, Natalie. She's so sweet when she wrote this, too. Because I could feel, you know, the hurt. But the question is, I have a weird tendency to leave veggies in my garden until they rot. Bolt or something else eats them. It's like a fear of harvesting. I don't know why, but I guess I'm wondering if I'm alone in this or not. Last year, I planted a ton of greens just to see how things grew in my new raised beds. And I enjoyed watching them grow, but ended up having to compost them before I ate them or even offer them to friends and neighbors. This is just an example and isn't the first time I've done this. I worry I will harvest too much and then there won't be any left, or I will harvest too early. What the heck is wrong with me?
You're my spirit animal, Natalie. That's what's wrong with you.
Yeah, serious. There's nothing wrong with you, Natalie. That's what I'm going to just go ahead and say that.
So she's listed some of the reasons. There are a bunch of reasons why this happened. So I've done this in almost all of the gardens I've had. So all of the garden years. Sometimes it's for me, if I'm learning how something grows, I'm not sure of when to harvest it. I remember like early on for okra, I can remember I had someone here working outside and they're like, oh, this okra is ready. And I was kind of sassy, like, no, it's fine. You know, I'll harvest it in a couple of days. And wood is all we'll say. So that's one thing. But that's kind of, you know, you learn, right? What Natalie's describing. So for those that do that, hey, it's a part of the game. What Natalie's describing, it's absolutely a fear of harvesting. It's that weird thing where for me, I'm just watching it and knowing that I should be doing something with it. And it's like, I'll get to it. And then here we are in, you know, March, and I still have a baby red cabbage in one of my buckets that I container garden in that I never got to. Yeah. No,
and I mean, you know, when I was in military school, there used to be a thing, and it was like, you know, if you did something wrong, when they came, like, why'd you do that? You would just say, no excuse. Because I really don't have an excuse. I did it. And it's jacked up. But, you know, I think it's natural. I'm actually right now looking for the conversation that she and I had out because I want to read you the response in a minute to her. But I think it's natural. And for me, what it really comes down to is as I'm harvesting and stuff like that, especially in the winter time, because it can be really hit or miss because I live in a heartbreak zone, that it could go either way. And I leave it there in hopes of like, okay, I'll harvest it later, so I make sure I can kind of continuously get that harvest.
Yeah.
Or I planted too much in order to make sure I had enough, and then I just leave them out there because I don't really want to bring them in the house. But at the same time, I know that if I do this, what I'm doing is I'm depleting my garden of nutrients that doesn't need to happen.
So I don't go.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. I don't go that technical. There is a layer of the guilt for me is, you know, obviously there's the idea of potential waste, but then it's like, are you planting too much? Do you have too much out there? And the reality is for single me, maybe, you know, but there are a bunch of ways to manage a big harvest, right? So I always have good intentions. Let's start there. And I'm sure Natalie does too, right? There's always good intentions. And then you end up with bolted lettuce, or luckily for some of these vegetables, they give you a lot of time, like summer vegetables, your peppers and your tomatoes. You can harvest a lot of those at varying times. And I'm pretty good about those vegetables. It's some of the others that I'm not so great at. And yeah, I wish I could help and give some advice on how to get out of this. Right. But I'm stuck in the thick of it, you know.
Yeah. Well, so I did give her some advice. Like I said, and
give us advice.
Well, no, hold on. I'm not going to do it just yet. I want to talk about it for a minute. I'm not trying to just give it all away. But No, seriously, I think it's, it's a lot of times people think that they're alone in this thing. And, typically gardening is not something where you go and you walk down the street and you can talk to anybody about. So you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so, I replied to her like, you're 100% not alone. Like I do it all the time. And, my goal is to do it less and less. But if you go back to my goal for the year, you're going to notice that that wasn't one of my goals because I just can't bring myself to like make it happen. So for instance, right now I have a Napa cabbage out in my garden. I've never grown it successfully. It's looking good, but it hasn't formed that typical head, that you see in the garden. But it's still got edible leaves on it. And in my head, I know that it's not going to make it much longer. You know what I mean? One or two things is going to happen. It's just going to give up because of the cold, or it's going to bolt because right now we're getting into like wild temperature swings, which is when things start to bolt. So, do I harvest it? Do I leave it? Do I wait for it? What is it? This is especially for me for greens because greens you can just let sit, right?
Yeah.
And they just grow and grow and grow, supposedly.
Yeah, well, she also brings up a good point, and this is where, like, the reason why when we were talking about which questions we wanted to cover off on, this was an important one, because she comments around or disease or bugs to get to them, right? And that's really key, because I'm a big fan of a tidy garden, and I think about, like, tidiness from, like, your tools are put up, and, you've pulled out debris from your garden, like there are no dead leaves, but it doesn't mean that because it isn't dead yet that it's healthy to stay in your garden, right? So I think that that's a way to be a bit more conscious because of the timing of this episode, this mini-so. I think it also gives us a chance to kind of take a second pass at our garden plan. So what we actually plan on putting out into our garden. And I'm not going to pretend as if I'm going to document all of the things that I kind of let go past their prime. But you have those things in your mind, right?
Yeah.
So take a look at your list of what you're growing. And did you really get to the 3 cabbages that you had in the garden last year? If you didn't, do you have plans to get to the 6 you plan on putting into your garden this year? Right. That's a kind of a preemptive strike, if you will.
Yeah, and so for me, like I talked to a lady, she's a professional horticulturist. That's her job. She's got a PhD in it. And she was telling me, she was like, look, if you have something growing in your garden and you're not going to harvest it, or it's done and you're waiting to get the last little bit, she's like, get it out of your garden. Because if you don't, what you're doing is you're setting up a hospitable environment for bugs, disease, all these other things. And what it does, especially for like pests, is it lets them get on there and then they get real nice and comfortable, and then they start laying eggs, and then you consistently are fighting them. So it's better to just go ahead, pull it out, whatever it is. Doesn't matter if it's, you're waiting for it maybe to fruit one more time, or you're just not going to eat it. Just pull it out, amend that bed, and either stick something else in there or just let it rest. There's nothing wrong with letting it rest. The good book says on the 7th year, let your gardens rest, or didn't say gardens, but, and I think a lot of times we don't do that, because I think about that and I'm like, well, damn, I can't imagine leaving a garden bed bare for a year. But what we can do is give these things space to breathe, room to kind of open up and let them heal themselves and not let these pests take control. So it's a lot like the aphids. You know what I mean? You don't do anything about those aphids. Like, they're not terrible, but once they get in there and you just let them sit, they're going to get in there and going to take over. And
from my experience, they have, at that time, they kind of set up camp with older vegetables, So my older leafy greens, my older kale, I find more aphids on them than I do the younger, if you will. Maybe for Natalie and for others, and I'll keep this in mind. I actually already know the answer for me. Is there a certain time of year for the garden that you're more prone to kind of leave things in there longer than they should be? For me, it's really towards the end of the season. And to be quite frank, it's just I'm tired, right? It's been a long garden season. And maybe, and again, this is just sharing a thought, not necessarily saying that I can sign on to commit to it, but maybe I am planning to plant less towards the end of the season. Maybe that's a part of my plan going forward, knowing that I'm going to have less steam to kind of manage through those things, right? Just an idea.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's mostly like late winter, spring vegetables. Those are the ones that I'm the worst at. And then at the end of summer and, going into fall, it's waiting for that last pepper, or waiting for those last few tomatoes or something like that. When you and I both know, if you've ever grown a tomato, once they're done and it starts getting cold, you ain't going to get no more tomatoes.
Yeah.
And if you are, they're not going to have any size to them. So that's kind of where I stand with that.
But this thing runs deeper for me, so that's the reason I'm not claiming to be, renewed. I have a bottle of spicy ranch dressing in my refrigerator, and I tried it a couple of times, and I just don't like it. Right? It's the wrong bit of creaminess and spice for my liking, but I can't bring myself to throw it away because it's kind of like it's still good.
Right.
It's a whole bottle of dressing, and I was sitting here thinking like maybe I'll use it as some type of like mayo for like, a burger or something, right? It's kind of like, now I'm forcing this stuff down, and it's very similar to, like you talked about the cabbage. Like the cabbage isn't quite to the place where you feel like it's done, but you can enjoy it all the same now, right? And so you're waiting, and I guess it is different because you haven't decided you don't like it, but you're waiting to figure out a thing and either harvest it now in this instance for you and your cabbage, or toss out the dressing for me.
Right, and it's funny you bring up cabbage because I'm growing like traditional cabbage right now, and I've been checking them, and instead of waiting for them to just get bigger and bigger and bigger, what I've been doing is harvesting when you go and you squeeze them, and they're like, okay, it's hard enough, like it's formed that head. Yeah. Then I just go ahead and harvest it, and I don't have that sitting around waiting because it will get kind of old. Yeah. But before we run out of time, I want to read the. Not the whole interchange, but just kind of like the last thing I told her. So we had a discussion back and forth a little bit about it. And she said, like, after we first started, she goes, I just actually did it again. And she said she was it was Chinese cabbage. It's funny, that's the same thing I have. But so I said back to her, I said, so you know how I like to give Batavia a challenge, and she always hates it when I do. That being said, next time you look out in your garden and see something you think maybe I should harvest it, go out and do it. Don't even think twice about it. Remember, you can always plant more. Yeah. Always. So, especially with greens, depending on where you live, and it doesn't matter where you live, if you're harvesting it, you can always put another one back in its space. So don't worry about running out. The number one energy waste is food. That's the number one waste in our country. So we want to make sure, and I'm preaching to the choir, like I do the same thing. So, and I've been trying to get better about it, is pull them out of your garden and put something in its place if you're really worried. If your concern is not having something to harvest, then do that. Otherwise, just try and stay on top of it, Yeah. And I think, and she said she was going to do it. I need to follow up with her.
But she also said in the opening that she ends up composting it. So good on her for at least giving it back to the garden, right?
Yes.
So it's definitely that full circle. It's not going to waste.
That's why composting is so important.
It absolutely is important. I fully agree. For those that are new here, I firmly believe in composting, and the short of it, and we'll drop this in every few episodes. I'm definitely afraid of mice and rats, and I just can't take the chance that if I start composting, they won't come. So I've just decided to buy compost.
They will come.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to have to toss my entire garden out because that's the level we're at. No. But anyway. Good on Natalie and others that find a way to
don't do that.
Use.
So, I mean, that's...
there we are. Yeah, here we are. Together?
Yeah.
Good on others that find the way to use that produce.
If I'm cutting you off, I'm sorry. The internet was going in and out, so I apologize, everybody. I caught what you said though in pieces. Yeah, can you hear me now?
It's all good. Yeah.
But I mean, if you have this issue, like I'm gonna say it right here, right now. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna look out in my garden, and every time I look out there, I'm gonna say, "Hey, I'm gonna harvest that." Then I'm gonna go do it. I'm not even gonna think. I'm just gonna go do it. Whatever. Who cares? Whatever. If my goal, what's your goal of gardening, right? What's your goal?
To produce food. To consume. Yeah.
So then go get it. I mean.
Oh wait, you've been waiting on this. I'm sorry. There you go.
Not really. But I think it's a very important question, and it's good on people to come out and admit that they do something like that. I think it's very powerful, and I think it's important that everybody out there that's listening, you all know, I want you to know, at least in my eyes, you're not alone. I do it with you. So let's try not to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So look, I gave Batavia 20 minutes this year, and we're almost out of time. So if you want to leave us a question, there's 2 ways to do it. You can email us through backyardgardenstv.com, or you can become a patron and send us a message on there. And we'll answer your question on Patreon, and we can get back to you and do something like this. Your questions really help out other people, because you have questions that we can't come up with. And if you have that question, then somebody else has that question. And I think it's really important to kind of get those out there. So those are the 2 places you can send them to us. Check us out on Tuesdays. We're going to be there chatting with you guys. So come check us out, 10:15 a.m. I know it's early, but it's okay.
It's also kind of weird because we'll be chatting when this one actually airs. As we tell people, we'll be chatting. Like we're chatting right now, like right now, like we're chatting.
Yeah, and it's super weird chatting when I'm chatting, because I'm chatting. That's why I chat. But you know what? Tell them something.
See ya.
Tell them something.
See ya.